And now we'll just transition to the first talk of this conference, which will be Dr. Puri's talk. Dr. Sumangala, would you like to read the introduction? Dr. Sumangala is joining us from India and New Delhi. She's an incredible scientist, and she's been with the Institute for a number of years. She actually joined from one of these Science and Scientist conferences in 2018, I believe, or 2017. And she's really incredible. We're very honored to have her here today.
I would like to offer my humble obeisances to the chair and the serving director, Srila Bhakti Madhav Puri Maharaj. And it is really an extreme moment of pleasure. And welcome to you, to all of you, to present in this Science and Scientist, 12th Science and Scientist Conference series. And I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Srila Bhakti Madhav Puri Maharaj. Srila Bhakti Madhav Puri Maharaj received a PhD in quantum chemistry from Georgetown University, and he did postdoc at the National Bureau of Standards in Washington, D.C. He published technical papers in the Journal of Chemical Physics, turned to Indian School of Yoga to learn about consciousness, and he started Hegel's G.W.Hegel.com website, and currently he is a serving director of Princeton Bhakti Vedanta Institute and a visionary behind the Science and Scientist annual conference series since 2013. I welcome and invite to Srila Bhakti Madhav Puri Maharaj. And today he is going to talk about a conceptual foundation for deeper insights into living and non-living system.
Modern science holds that matter is fundamental to reality. This privileged concept of matter is understood as an existent static being comprised of individual parts or atoms, related and unified in a manner external to them. So reality is characterized as an inorganic mechanical system. Due to the lack of inner necessity, the parts of the system exist indifferently in isolation from each other, even though their collective work powers the system. The study of the laws or principles that describe the movements and relationships of the parts of mechanical systems is what we call the science of physics. When physics is assumed to be the most fundamental science, and knowledge gleaned through its presumptuous scaled up to chemical and biological systems, then we end up with reductionism. Reductionism is the belief that wholes are nothing but the sum of their parts. When applied to biology, reductionism tends to the notion of abiogenesis, that life comes from matter, i.e. that all living entities are just complex aggregates of material building blocks, atoms and molecules. Such a claim has never been validated, since no lab has ever been able to produce a single cell by synthesizing molecules, what to speak of organisms. With all our science, all the scientists in the world together cannot make a single blade of grass. Rather, the law of biogenesis, that life and matter come from life, is observed by people every single day. Instead of an ossified world, isolated parts externally unified, the organicist view, which is non-mechanistic, sees the world as a dynamic process of becoming, whose constituents are fundamentally interdependent, internally related. This perspective views biology as the prominent natural science and considers that physics and chemistry should be studied in relationship to biology. Becoming involves several moments that necessarily contextualize existence. The coming to be and ceasing to be of a thing, whatever exists, is coming from something, which is the formal aspect of cause, and is going towards something, the final aspect of cause. Being form, purposefulness, biology. These diachronic relationships coexist with synchronic ones, like efficient causal relations. The mechanistic view is positivistic. It only accounts for positive existent objects being static being abstracted from the context of their development. On the other hand, this organicist approach is comprehensive enough to encompass being as one of the moments of the dialectical development of becoming, along with being's opposite or negation, non-being. Put simply, dialectical development entails the movement from thesis to antithesis and then synthesis. This dynamic process necessitates consideration of the negative as well as the positive. Without considering the negative, all assessments of developmental processes must remain superficial. A complete comprehension of life and consciousness must go beyond all immediate appearances, yet encompass them. This latter perspective is most adequately articulated and developed in the G.W.F. Hegel's philosophy. In contrast to most Western scientific approaches that start with the notion of matter being fundamental to an inert reality, where activity only results from energy exchange through collision of physical bodies or the influence of natural forces, Hegel suggests that reality is fundamentally an active process that encompasses matter as an infantile moment of its development. Such a processual reality necessarily sublates or integrates this underdeveloped stage of matter in the unfolding of more comprehensive stages that accommodate static elements as a kind of function of the dynamic, organic whole that is reality. This idea of reality as an unceasing dynamic process, known as the organic whole, which we might further determine to be spirit when reality's objective processual nature is simultaneously considered alongside its subjective self-conscious nature, is very close to Vedanta's conception of Brahman. Following the example given by the ancient Vedanta Sutra, which begins with the aphorism Tato Brahma Jigyasa, now therefore inquire about spirit or Brahman, we need to reimagine modern science in a manner that starts with the organic whole and then seeks to understand how matter is one integrated aspect of that whole, along with other aspects such as life and consciousness. This is where Vedanta and science meet. It is necessary to clarify that by calling reality the organic whole, we're not claiming that it is a biological organism, just as matter is an immature moment of the organic whole's development. Organism is a slightly more mature stage. But just as matter is not the foundation of reality, neither is organism. Humbly contributing to the advancement of modern science in this direction, we will now offer a conceptual framework that shows the logical distinction and relation between mechanical, chemical, biological, and human bodies based on Hegel's philosophy. We'll also discuss how this framework helps to distinguish between life and non-life. The logical distinctions between mechanical, chemical, biological, and human bodies are determined by the interdependent dialectical dynamic between self and other, or more concretely, an individual and its environment. The identity of each kind of natural body is found in its other, and the extent to which a particular body unites with the otherness, for this union is the claiming of its identity, determines its kind. The limitations that one type of body encounters while attempting to connect with this other sets a necessary standard for the determination of a new type of body. This conceptual development logically connects mechanical, chemical, biological, and human bodies, where humans are the most capable of integrating otherness and thus truly claim their identity. Before explaining the logical development of our claim that the identity of each kind of natural body is found in its other, and the extent to which a particular body unites with otherness, where this union is the claiming of its identity, determines its kind, let us briefly consider an empirical example, demonstrating the first half of the claim, that natural bodies require something outside of themselves to exist. The second half becomes clear since the first part is developed. Once the first part is developed, amino acids are fundamental constituents of proteins throughout living bodies that support biological processes, such as growth, healing, and digestion. Out of the 20 amino acids required for protein synthesis, 11 are made by the living body. These are termed non-essential amino acids. The remaining 9 are called essential amino acids because the body cannot make them. These essential amino acids must come completely from diet. This is one empirical example of how self-constitutionality relies on its other. This logical development of self-other dynamics in nature begins with the concept of externality, as discussed in the Encyclopedia of Nature by Hegel. This complements the Vedic view of the Bahiranga Shakti, or external potency, or Maya Shakti, illusory energy of the Absolute. In the immediate sense, everything exists external to each other in nature, although the development of nature shows that everything is actually intimately connected. In the case of natural bodies, externality refers to the identity of two bodies being outside of one another. The degree to which a body successfully overcomes externality and claims its identity determines its superiority to the other kinds of natural bodies. This development reveals a spectrum of states of integration between self and other, where inferior bodies cannot sustain this integration, thus giving rise to the logical necessity for a body that can. The human body is the only kind of natural body with the potential for permanently maintaining the unity between self and other, which is due to the exclusively human capacity for thinking, different from the cognition found in cells, plants, and animals. Ultimately, this capacity for thought manifests as the prospect for attaining self-knowledge. He will try to show how the human body necessarily emerges to overcome the inadequacy of mechanical, chemical, and non-human biological bodies, and overcoming externality and claiming their identity. According to Descartes, a corporal body is extended substance, or res extensus. This abstract notion of extension may be more concretely represented as space, or spatial extension. This means that its identity is external to itself. In other words, its substance at one point is identical to itself at each point beyond or external to itself. An individual body consists of X number of points. Although each of those points inheres in a single body, each point is external to every other point. This externality of each point from every other is what makes it an extended object. The limit of the body is the boundary where the self of the body ceases and otherness necessarily begins. However, the boundary or the the boundary or other determines the figure or shape of the self. This means that the other is essential for determining the identity of the self. And this means that the self of the body or its identity is external to itself as the other of itself. Such a body determined purely by spatiality is called a mechanical body. Interactions between mechanical bodies are not merely external relations where the individuals don't change. There is no internal impetus inspiring the relationship. Thus, mechanical unities are just aggregates. A mechanical body remains the same whether or not it interacts with other bodies, which indicates an indifference to otherness. Contradicting that the identity of all natural bodies lies in otherness, this is how modern science typically views mechanical systems. However, as explained above, mechanical bodies fundamentally depend on their other. Let's briefly consider some familiar examples. The orientation of a gear's teeth is determined by the relation to another gear, so that the teeth interlock and rotate. Thus, the mechanical body's identity lies outside of it. To an extent, it is what it is not. The necessity for a particular shape of a gear depends on its relation to other gears, and the shape of the pool ball is determined by its relation to the pool table and other balls. The figure of a rock is a byproduct of erosion, that is, its mechanical relationship with air and water. The figure of a surface is completely dependent on its relationship to otherness. Its boundary simultaneously indicates where itself stops and otherness begins, and vice versa. Although the selfhood of a mechanical body is mediated through its other, the nature of these bodies is such that mechanical encounters result in collision and rebounding in opposite directions. The tragic fate of a mechanical body is that unity with its other is never realized. Even if two or more mechanical bodies were to remain stationary, situated next to each other, such that their surfaces were touching, this would still not qualify as a unity with otherness in any meaningful way when compared to the significant and progressively dynamic unities demonstrated by the other kinds of bodies. The self of a mechanical body proves to be in its other, since the limit of its figure is determined by its relationship with something else. Yet the body can never unite with another. It can't claim its identity due to its indifference and lack of transformation in that relationship. The discrepancy between the mechanical bodies that mean the identity of indifference to otherness and the mediated identity of dependency on otherness reveals its conceptual inadequacy. Thus, the explanatory value of mechanism is dependent on being contextualized within a more coherent conceptual framework of which it is a valid yet incomplete perspective. Thus, certain aspects of chemical, biological, and human bodies can be described mechanically, but it won't completely explain these more sophisticated phenomena. The chemical body has all the properties of a mechanical one, plus it overcomes the tragic fate of not uniting with its others. Chemicals are polar bodies that attract and bond with one another, producing a compound. Bonding refers to an intrinsic affinity between two chemical bodies that does not exist with mechanical bodies. Despite this chemical affinity, the bond can be broken and each reactant can return to its previous state. The affinity also remains in chemical products and compels them to continually bond with other bodies, forming other compounds. On which the two sides retain their identity while existing in that unity. These perpetual actions prevent chemical bodies from ever becoming a real identity, since otherness keeps opposing successive compounds with an assuming assimilating to a lasting unity. This is distinguished from a biological body, which takes the other and transforms it into itself, which is beyond it, is just being a compound produced through internal affinity. Ultimately, the inadequacy of a chemical body's self-other dynamic comes from being from being in a constant state of flux due to their fundamental polar nature. Chemicals overcome the inadequacy of mechanical bodies, but the unity is not endure and is not as stable as biological and human bodies. Consider a water molecule. Although water is considered a very stable product, it may still react with other chemicals to become a hydrate. Here the other chemical absorbs water onto its surface or into its structure. A familiar mineral hydrate is Epsom salts, magnesium sulfate heptahydrate, magnesium SO4, 7H2O, used in therapeutic baths. Epsom salts are chemically bonded, thus a new chemical body has formed. As the next logical stage of development, for natural bodies, chemical bodies also encompass lower-level mechanical relations with each other, such that two chemical bodies can combine with each other without becoming chemically bonded. Methane hydrates, CH2 5.75H2O, are an example where a methane molecule, CH4, becomes engaged with the interlocking water molecules. This creates an ice-like substance that emerges in conditions of low temperature and high pressure, like in the deep ocean. So the identity of the chemical body itself is in its other. This is why individual chemicals have the propensity to bond. They naturally seek unity with otherness because their very constitution depends on it. This is not cognitive seeking, however, which requires an individual to have the capacity for decision making and managing goal states. While stable chemical products represent a state of existence where the self of a chemical body is momentarily claimed through the bonding of reactants, the inadequacy of the chemical body is that it never reaches a substantial unity that persists despite encountering other bodies. Biological bodies demonstrate the capacity for persistent, self-maintained unity with otherness. Biological bodies are distinguished through their self-determined ability to assimilate otherness within themselves. Recall that chemical bodies form compounds that can either be broken or perpetually bond which is why they are deemed less sophisticated than biological bodies. For the standard for sophistication is the capacity for an enduring unity between self and other. Biological bodies, on the other hand, subsist through the absorption of otherness. When a grass consumes sugar or a cow consumes grass, only the food is transformed, not the consumer. The food's original constitution disintegrates into basic units that are integrated and repurposed by the consumer's body to fuel biological processes. Whether eating food, breathing air, or absorbing sunlight, biological bodies maintain their integrity by assimilating otherness. To further assess the integrity of different kinds of biological bodies, it is relevant to consider the difference between the unity of animal bodies and plant bodies. In his critique of pure judgment, Immanuel Kant described an organism as an entity where one, the whole, depends on the parts, 2, the parts depend on the whole. And 3, the parts depend on each other. This dynamic and interdependent threefold conception is a great place to start a comparison. For most animals, the loss of a limb or an organ is a devastating and possibly lethal experience. Although there are exceptions, their limbs and sometimes organs regenerate in fish and amphibians. Even some reptiles can regrow their tails, and deer regrow antlers. Limb organ regeneration is not the norm in the animal kingdom. This suggests that Kant's organismic standard is clearly present in animals. The integrity of animal bodies is strong. The whole and parts are profoundly integrated and cannot exist without one another. Plants do not demonstrate such strong integrity. Whether large or small, parts of plants can be removed without any significant interference with the functioning of the whole. The removed part may even generate a whole new plant, or it can be grafted to a plant of a different species and live a healthy life. Plant cells are largely considered totipotent because each individual cell contains information about the entire genome of the plant. Thus, under the right conditions, many plants can be grown by taking a single cell from an existing mature plant. This is called somatic embryogenesis. The totipotency of plants underlies the methods for propagating hundreds of plant species by taking leaf or stem cuttings from an existing mature organism. Consider the removing of an arm of a monkey or even of a regenerating starfish will not lead to a new organism growing from that arm. Further, we cannot transplant a vital part of one animal onto or into another animal and expect a healthy organism. Current work on xenotransplantation tries to achieve this, but only as an experimental end-of-life treatment. Conversely, limbs of plants can be liberally attached to plants of different species and continue to thrive. People have created so-called fruit cocktail trees. Through grafting, they can grow cherries, plums, and peaches all on one tree. Even apples and pears or lemons, limes, oranges, and grapefruits can be grafted onto a single tree. Grafting is possible for any plant with a cambium. These facts demonstrate that the parts of plants are less integral to the whole. A plant can be dismembered without missing a beat, but that calls into question whether such parts were members to begin with are actually implicit wholes in and of themselves. Further, plants are stationary in the environment, while they absorb otherness like sunlight, water, and minerals with themselves. Plants do not assimilate the spatiality of the other into itself. It just remains a compound in conjunction with self and the other. Thus, it fails to fully integrate otherness with itself. These are points for further discussion that won't be addressed here. Returning to the determination of biological bodies in general and how the deficiency leads to necessity for the human body, we can understand that living entities are eager to possess and assimilate what is other than themselves in order to maintain their basic individual needs. In many cases, they literally absorb otherness and transform it into themselves, as seen through the consumption of food, air, and sunlight, demonstrating the claiming and maintaining of their identity. There is one critical aspect of the biological experience, however, that similarly triggers taking possession of otherness, yet it cannot be satisfied simply by absorbing the other. This is reproduction. Two mates satisfying this urge through sexual unity, where both individuals remain as they are, neither is transformed into the other. This frustrates the entity's tendency to absorb otherness, Those sexual acts, at least for animals, can be quite abrupt and aggressive. To clarify, this sexual need of the biological body cannot be satisfied by the assimilating otherness, so it interrupts the integration of self and other. This deficiency is overcome in the human body. The human body encompasses all the previous kinds of bodies and relationships, mechanical, chemical, and biological, and matures beyond them. While some people call humans rational animals, this is misleading. No animal can be rational because animals do not think. That's precisely why they cannot overcome the disintegration of self and other during sexual reproduction. This isn't denying the cognitive capacities of animals, but enunciating the nuanced distinctions between cognition, consciousness, and thought is not the purpose of this talk. And experience, in general, we refer to thought as a capacity for an intentional development of self-conscious experience. Non-living entities have the capacity for cognitive experiences, where they make decisions, cooperate, and solve problems. But only humans demonstrate awareness of cognitive experience while it is happening. This self-aware experience is not what allows us to inquire about our identity and purpose, which has given rise to the sciences, humanities, and civilized life. So humans are not rational. We are in a different category altogether. Animals have no way to assimilate their mate, since all other assimilation is accomplished through physical consumption, which would prevent the reproductive act from occurring. Humans overcome this dilemma by assimilating their mate through thought. Sexual reproduction becomes a thoughtful and loving act, as opposed to an aggressive, animalistic one, where the partners form a unity through their shared self-reflective affection. Animals instinctively feel that otherness, the environment, is for them, and they try to take and forcibly assimilate it. And that is successful. Aggression, when this is unsuccessful, aggression arises. From a conceptual perspective, animals can only integrate otherness by destroying or dissolving difference. The other stops being what it is for what it was and conforms to the needs of the animal, while this also applies to humans regarding biological processes such as eating and breathing. The sophistication of thought allows humans to integrate with otherness without dissolving differences. Development of thought accommodates recognition of unity in diversity and identity in difference. Human partners can assimilate one another without destroying each other's bodies. This also extends the relationship between humans and the environment. Humans assimilate nature not only by consuming it, but by knowing it. Humans can even assimilate itself through self-knowledge. Hegel's philosophy offers a robust development of this line of thought, which is deeply complementary to the Vedic view. The conceptual development connecting mechanical, chemical, biological, and human bodies through considering self-other dynamics can serve as a foundation for deeper insight into the being to the living and non-living systems. In summary, the identity of each kind of body lies in the other. Self and other are external to each other in nature because externality itself is one of the fundamental determinations of nature, as immediately conceived and as Hegel explains. This corresponds to the Vedic conception of Bahiranga Shakti, external potency, or Maya Shakti, illusory energy, because the externality between self and other is not adequate to their truth. In truth, self and other are deeply and dialectically connected identity and difference. This starts to become clearer through the development of the sophistication of different kinds of natural bodies. The sophistication of each body is determined by its capacity to unify with otherness, thus claiming their identity, where the disintegration of this unity demonstrates the particular body's deficiency and lack of adequateness. Each higher grade of sophistication encompasses or sublates the lower kinds of bodies while maintaining a distinct superiority to them. Mechanical bodies prove to rely on their other in that the boundary of their determinate figure, which is their essence, depends on its relationship to other bodies. When these bodies meet, however, they only repel each other, such that any meaningful unity is not achieved. Chemical bodies successfully unite with other bodies through chemical bonding due to their fundamentally polar nature. This same nature is what forces them to perpetually seek another body to react with. Thus the unity of self and other never maintains. Biological bodies, however, can sustain their union with the other. Plants and animals absorb and assimilate otherness in such a manner that eradicates the other's previous existence in order to perpetuate their self-maintained existence. The wholeness of plants proves to be less integral than the wholeness of animals, indicating that the unity of self and other is more fully realized in animals. The only biological activity that demonstrates the deficiency of the animal body is reproduction, since they cannot overcome the dilemma by mentally assimilating their partner, a natural environment, and even in themselves. We hope that the value of this conception has been clearly presented, and that it might encourage further development and applications, such as in systems biology, which necessarily concerns relational processes constituting all levels of organizational life, from the molecular to the cellular, organismic, and ecological, to the energy exchange and feedback connecting these levels. Further discussion can be had by comparing specific aspects of the nature of each kind of body with the others to emphasize exactly why the more developed bodies can integrate otherness more cohesively. Explicitly comparing the categorical difference between mechanical and biological unities and relationships is very useful for the current paradigm shift occurring in 21st century biology.
Key takeaways from this presentation include that modern science presupposes that all natural bodies are mechanical. This is ontological monism, which is the notion that things just exist, that there is only one kind of fundamental existence, which inevitably leads to atomism and reductionism, where wholes can only be conceived as aggregates of parts, or mechanical unities. The categorical differences between mechanical, chemical, biological, meaning nutritive and sentient, or plant and animal, and human bodies represent an ontological plurality. Aristotle recognized this thousands of years ago when he enunciated that being is said in many ways. You can find references to this in several places throughout his metaphysics. So the conceptual framework presented here offers a straightforward way to experimentally test reductionist and mechanistic presuppositions based on how different individual bodies interact with their environment. Some central philosophical principles of organic holism, which are necessary to contextualize this presentation within broader studies of Hegelian and Vedantic philosophy, which are useful to systems science. The fundamental principle of organic holism is expressed in Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, paragraph 20, thusly: "The truth is the whole. The whole, however, is merely the essential nature reaching its completeness through the process of its own development. Of the absolute it must be said that it is essentially a result, that only at the end is it what it is in very truth." Another important principle is Kant's threefold organismic standard that we saw several slides ago. So the development from mechanical selves being alienated from their identity through human selves who are self-conscious of their identity and difference with otherness represents particular moments of the absolute truths, the organic whole's own process of self-knowledge. Finally, the third point is that everything pivots on the idea that the absolute reality is as much subject as it is substance. This establishes the thesis and antithesis. We try to say that the truth is either the rational or the experiential. But this is one-sided understanding. One side implies that there is another side. The whole is the unity or synthesis of both sides. There is a dialectical relation between subject, the rational, and object, or experiential, which is evident in living nature. This unity exists immediately, physically, as life, which is a synthesis of objectivity and subjectivity, or the mind and body of a living entity. And it exists in a more mediated way as cognition, where the very faculty of cognizing an object requires us to take it into one's mind. And at the highest level, this dialectical relation between subject and object, or substance, so subject and substance, is the truth or absolute idea. The capacity to accommodate this dynamic development within thinking is what Hegel calls speculative. So these logical principles are in agreement with the conclusions of both Vedantic and Hegelian philosophy. They are also valuable to systems scientists interested in comprehending any level of organization in a manner that can cohesively scale up to the broadest, most universal aspect of reality, which has influence and contextualizes all the lower levels. And second, system scientists who are interested in constructing systems in order to observe the manifest principles of ontological plurality and expand upon this conceptual foundation for deeper insights into living and non-living systems.